Dr. Rose Casper is a pathologist who is a workaholic with minimal social skills. She works in a hospital morgue, where her job involves examining and studying the deceased. On the other hand, Cely faces different aspects of mortal existence. She works as a maternity nurse in the same hospital and is a single mother to her 6-year-old daughter, Lila. After work, Rose goes to a bar where a man hits on her. She turns him down but invites him to the restroom, where she manually stimulates him before collecting his semen in a vial. After Rose gets home, she opens a freezer containing blood bags and frozen pigs. She takes a blood bag and begins to transfuse it to her pig Muriel. She then lies down on the floor and injects herself with the semen she collected earlier. The next morning, Cely wakes up to find Lila feeling sick. She asks her neighbor Pauline to look after her before leaving for work. At the hospital, Cely has a very busy day, leaving her no chance to talk to her daughter. Later, she accidentally drops her phone into the toilet, damaging it. When she returns home from work, she finds no one there, only to discover blood in the bathroom and a note left by Pauline informing her that she has taken Lila to the hospital. Meanwhile, Rose receives a body, which turns out to be Lila, who died from bacterial meningitis. Cely arrives at the hospital and is devastated to learn about her daughter's death. She then goes to the pathology room to take a last look at her daughter, but Rose informs her that Lila's body has already been sent to the medical examiner and provides her with their contact number. Later, Cely's colleague, Rita, joins her on the ground as she lies down beside her, attempting to comfort her. Cely blames herself for being absent when her daughter needed her the most. Rita then offers to take Cely home. In the parking lot, Cely notices Rose struggling to put a large suitcase in the back of her car. Cely goes home and calls the medical examiner's office, only to find out they are closed for the weekend. On Monday, Cely visits the office, but is informed that they do not have Lila's body. She returns to the hospital and brings up the issue with the authorities. Colleen finds Rose and asks about Lila's body, but Rose claims not to know and says the medical examiner's record-keeping is a mess. Cely becomes extremely upset and refuses to leave until she can speak with Rose, but they discover that Rose is gone. Cely finds Rose in the parking lot and tries to talk to her, but Rose ignores her and drives away. Sometime later, Rose returns home to find Cely waiting outside her door. Cely asks her about her daughter's whereabouts. Rose attempts to avoid the question when suddenly an alarm goes off inside her apartment. As Rose rushes in, Cely forces her way through and is shocked to see Lila on a bed, connected to various tubes and medical equipment. Cely confronts Rose, who reveals that she needs to examine Lila as she is still alive. Cely can't believe her daughter is still alive. Rose explains that Lila's genetic profile makes her a perfect candidate for an experimental treatment that she is working on for death. She mentions that Muriel died 2 months ago, and she has found a way to reanimate her using serum derived from fetal pigs. She is now working on the same treatment for Lila, using the same principle that triggers cell regeneration. Since Lila's primitive cranial nerve reflexes are still intact, theoretically, she could wake up. Cely decides to move in with Rose to ensure that Lila makes it through the experiment. Afterward, Rose goes for a prenatal checkup, which reveals she is 10 weeks pregnant, and this is not her first pregnancy. Rose and Cely arrange to work different shifts so they can take turns watching over Lila. At the hospital, Cely steals the medical supplies that Rose needs and hides them in a large suitcase. Meanwhile, Rose takes some pills and sits on the toilet to forcibly induce a miscarriage, keeping the fetus in a jar to use for deriving the serum. Sometime later, Rose disconnects Lila from the ventilator, and within seconds, Lila begins to breathe on her own. Cely calls it a miracle, but Rose gets offended and says this is pure science and her hard work. She then shares that her mother was a biology teacher who passed away from Parkinson's disease. When she was 6 years old, she became fascinated with regeneration after her mother instructed her to cut off a starfish's limb and observed its regrowth throughout the year. One day at work, Scott notices that Rose is bleeding from between her legs. Later that day, when Rose does not return home as expected, Cely calls her phone and learns from Scott that Rose has collapsed and is in surgery. At that moment, Cely sees Lila sitting up in her bed. Meanwhile, Rose wakes up in the hospital and is informed by the doctors that she has developed an infection in her reproductive system and she cannot conceive anymore. Rose returns home and finds that the liquid in the jar is ruined. She then discovers that Lila has awakened earlier than expected and says she shouldn't be awake before she collapses again. Later, Cely helps Rose redo her stitches. Rose explains that they need more serum to sustain Lila's life. Since the serum comes from fetal tissue and she can't conceive anymore, they need to find another way. Rose spends the entire night trying to figure something out. Cely suggests that they can use her to develop the serum, but Rose reveals that the donor has to match Lila's blood type and HLA markers, or it could potentially kill her. When Cely mentions the organ donor registry, Rose suddenly thinks of something and leaves. Cely finds out that there are only 2 bags of serum left and appears worried. After a while, Rose returns and finds Leela watching TV. Rose tells Cely that she searched through the hospital's OB intake record and found a match named Emily, who is in her 2nd trimester, and they can use her amniotic fluid, which is not ideal, but she can make it work. Rose has already altered her test results, so Emily will have to come in for an amnio. Cely finds this idea awful, but eventually agrees. When Emily shows up for her amniocentesis, Cely manages to steal the fluid. She goes home and sees Rose testing Lila's responsiveness. Cely is happy to see her making progress and hugs her, but Leela pushes her away. Rose tells Cely that the fluid is only enough for 3 to 4 weeks, and they need to make Emily's amnio results inconclusive until they get her placenta, which could help them for the entire year. Cely argues that this is unethical. At that moment, Muriel has a seizure and vomits because Rose forgot to give her serum. Cely realizes that the same thing can happen to Lila. That night, while bathing Lila, Cely sings to her and notices a response from Leela, which excites and makes Cely happy. This motivates her to do whatever it takes to have her daughter back. In the following days, Leela shows much improvement in her motor coordination. One day, Cely watches her daughter's developmental progress on video and is shocked to find a tape showing Rose's many attempts to perform her experiments on her mother. Sometime later, Emily comes to the hospital for another amniocentesis and tells Cely that she has decided to deliver her baby at a different hospital. When Cely returns home and gets into an argument with Rose, who blames Cely for not trying hard enough to convince Emily to stay, which is not something she can really control, Cely snaps and confronts Rose about her unethical practices on her mother, calling her a mad scientist. Rose yells back, claiming that she has been doing everything to keep Lila alive, leaving Cely speechless. While at work, Cely calls Emily but hangs up without saying anything. Meanwhile, Rose is taking a shower and doesn't notice that Lila has crawled out on her own. Lila attempts to touch Muriel, but she bites her hand. Lila then uses the IV stand to stab Muriel and kills her. After conducting further research, Rose tells Cely that due to the insufficient serum, although Lila's organs are still regenerating, her brain cannot communicate with her body because her spinal nerves were shredded. Rose then asks Cely to perform a bone marrow aspiration on her, which produces a weaker serum that helps them compensate for the lack of serum. However, this substrate barely keeps Lila alive, showing no signs of improvement. The treatment eventually proves unsuccessful. Unable to accept this, Cely suggests that they should look further for a match, but Rose advises her to spend as much time with her daughter as possible. Afterward, Lila's heart stops beating once again, but Cely does not give up. When Rose returns home from work, she discovers Lila's corpse inside the freezer. Meanwhile, Cely shows up at Emily's house and pretends to give her medical records. Emily is very grateful and offers her tea. While Cely helps make the tea, she puts something in it that causes Emily to have a seizure and induces premature labor. Cely calls an ambulance and rushes Emily to the hospital, where doctors perform a premature delivery. The baby survives, but Emily suffers another seizure, and she succumbs to it. Cely then tells Rose to go to the pathology lab, where Rose gains access to Emily's body to obtain her placenta. When Rose returns home, she finds Cely sitting in the dark, who claims she didn't mean to kill her. However, Rose interrupts and says it doesn't matter. They then make more serum and conduct a procedure on Lila, reviving her once again.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our channel for more videos.